Chapter 19. How Irish Coffee was Invented. "How did you hurt yourself, Grandad?" Seamie asked, as he rescued the bottle of Jameson from under the armchair. More or less confined to that chair now because of a weeping varicose vein, he kept things that mattered close at hand. Some said it wouldn't heal due to a tanner's bullet being lodged in the knee, but he wouldn't admit to it. The closest he ever came to that was one evening when Tess and Seamie dropped in on him to suss out a problem they knew only he could solve. It was about a cave Tess knew to be beyond in the glebe, but she couldn't pinpoint it. As there was no hurry on them, they beat around the bush for a while before broaching the subject. Seamie marvelled at the sheer diplomacy of the two old friends. Both knew where they were coming from and where they were going, but if the subject surfaced a minute before the small talk was concluded, all would be lost. There wasn't a danger of it, as the timing was in the tay, as Tess told him later. "I used it myself the time they were after me and nearly nailed me," he confessed. "I could barely pull the leg after me, and they knew they were getting close when I saw a badger disappearing between rocks a bit below me. Better to be savaged by the badger than be beaten to death by the murdering bastards, was my only thought as I flung myself in after it and rolled up in a ball. It must have got a fierce fright, because it tore out of there like a mad thing, frightening the daylights out of the Brits as well. They knew no man would be stupid enough to hide in a badger's set, so shifted their search to the wood beyond the Turlough. I lay there for ages until I knew they were well gone, and then made it across the fields to Knocka through Ballintubber Lane. By the grace of God, Maggie Connell came on me just in time as I was on my last legs. With a strip of her slip, she managed to stem the flow of blood until she got me to her place in Knocka and onto the settle bed. As soon as the men came home, they got me out through the attic to the outhouses, just in case the tanners arrived out of the blue, as they had a habit of doing. Maggie said I slept like a log for 3 days, but she might have been adding a bit to it there. Anyway, she had the 4 corners of Knocka watched in case the bastards did a Cromwell and came back to murder all before them. Those were dangerous days, I tell you. You never knew where they were hiding, or who might give the game away. The few that did paid the penalty for being informers. Your man and listener got off by the skin of his teeth, and only because of his people, who were the salt of the earth. He was black and blue for a month, and would have been a lot worse but for the potstick and the hearse. It worked, though, because it frightened the daylights out of anyone and stopped a fair few of them from chancing it again. The badger did me no wrong, and gave me one of the safest places in Ireland to hide out during the struggle," he concluded as they marvelled at his story. "I doubt you'll want to bring the secret with you, Paddy," was all Tess said. "You have a reason, girl, I suspect," he grinned as he winked over at Seamie. "Seamie knows most of the spots, Paddy, and we'll have to leave the lot to him, as there's few others with the interest," she cajoled. "You're right, girl. I'll draw it out for him, and if he finds it, he'll have found it himself, and no one will be a bit the wiser." "That's more than fair of you, Paddy," she said, as she got up and put her hand on his shoulder. "Would to God they were half as good as you," she said, as she wiped a tear away from her eye. "Go on now, Tess. Few did what Margaret or yourself did, and the 2 of you paid for it. If it wasn't for coming on, a lot worse would have happened, but you'll reap your rewards for sure," he managed to say without breaking down in front of the 2 of them. Make the tay, Seamie, or the water will go up in flames if you don't." He laughed to lighten the situation a little. Not another word was said about it until a long time later, when a drop of paddy and a good story lubricated the memory. "What was that about Mick Coffey?" he remarked to Seamie a few evenings later. "I was talking about coffee, not Mick Coffey," Seamie laughed. "And what's that? Do you mind me asking?" "The master was talking about it and said it was all the go above in Dublin." "And what do you do with it?" "It was a bit like tea, but completely different," he went on to explain. "You had to boil the water, as you would with tea, and then you put in a couple of spoonfuls of the stuff, add sugar and stir it. And then I suppose you dose calves with it." He laughed uproariously at the thought of it. Seamie offered to ask the master to order a little of it so as to try it out for themselves. A few days later he arrived with a small jar of brown powder and proceeded to set up the experiment. As soon as the kettle was singing, he filled 2 mugs, added a generous teaspoon of the powder, a level teaspoon of sugar, and topped it all up with a drop of milk before handing it to him. Well, a face as ugly as Mrs. Esler's cat crossed the old man's face as the liquid slid down his throat. "Now, I've drunk sour doses in my time of it, but that takes beating. Will you hand me the bottle before I'm poisoned?" He grimaced as he drew his hanky from his pocket to wipe the thought of it away. A decent thimbleful of the ishkabaha seemed to restore his equanimity, so he had another go at it, while Seamie looked on in wonder as he poured a double dose into the mug. "Now that's the real McCoy," he said as he licked his lips. "A little drop of cream on that, and you keep the doctor at bay for many's a day. Do you know what we'll call it?" he said, the hint of a smile lighting his eyes. "No idea, Grandad." "Irish coffee, of course," he laughed. The thought of offering the recipe to Mulvey for a consideration entered his mind. A couple of evenings later, John Joe and his father pulled up at the gate to take him to the shinny. He didn't bother much now, but the idea of the Irish coffee was growing on him as he had taken a liking to it. "With ye in a jiffy," he shouted as he laced up his boots with some difficulty. As ever, John Joe was beside him to help and fill him in on the local gossip. "Better than 2 women," he joked as he eased himself onto the back of the tractor. "Take her easy now," he advised as he got a good grip on the bucket seat. Mad Maggie hung under the hedge until they moved off. As usual, she was looking for a few spoonfuls of sugar for the cuddy, though what he did with it was anyone's guess. Some said it was for the putching, but if it was then, he knew how to mind it. Ned was like a 2-year-old behind the counter as they walked in. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" he smiled as he hurried to make space for the 2 elderly gentlemen. "One of the Marys, I'd say." "Oh, sharp as a tack this evening, I note," he replied, the wind gone out of his sails in one sentence. "Only coddin'. No harm meant, me man. Give us a few half ones there when you get a minute." "A drop of water in it, I presume?" he inquired. "There might be enough of that in it already," brought the house down as Coffee nearly choked on his Guinness, while others slapped the counter and their tables in delight at the response. "You must have met yourself getting up this morning," Ned snapped, setting the tone for the evening, one quip borrowing the other in rapid succession until the cards appeared and the serious business began.